And joining me from Pennsylvania is Erick Stakelbeck. Erick is director of Christians United for Israel's Watchman Project. He's also a fellow TBN host. He has the show The Watchman every week on TBN. Fascinating information. Welcome, Erick.
David, great to be with you.
It's good to have you here. Now, Erick, I know I've been to the Holy Land about a dozen times, and I just love the history that you find literally everywhere you look. But as you know, I'm particularly interested in biblical history that you find there. Can you talk about some of the latest archaeological discoveries going on in Israel today?
Yeah, David, thanks for having me. And as you know, as someone who's also been to the Holy Land many times, it never gets old. And every time you lay your feet on that sacred ground, you're finding something new. In particular, lately, David, with biblical archaeology. It's amazing. It's really hard to keep track. It seems that every day there's some new announcement from the Israel Antiquities Authority announcing some groundbreaking new archaeological find in Israel that proves the truth of the Bible. Here's two, David, in just the past month and a half alone. Number one, right next to, ironically enough, the brand new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. It's in the Arnona neighborhood of Jerusalem, not far from the TBN studio there, by the way, right next to the U.S. Embassy, which was only opened in May 2018. Israeli archaeologists uncovered a massive, what they believe is, administrative center. Ironically enough, right next to an embassy, which is a modern day administrative center. But this administrative center, David, dates back some 2,700 years to the time of King Hezekiah and his son Manasseh. Now, Hezekiah, as we know from the Bible, one of the good kings, Manasseh, one of the not so good kings. But this administrative center was at least an acre large, a pretty big facility. And inside, Israeli archaeologists found coins and seals that date back to that period. Now, remember, David, as you know very well, this was also the period where the Assyrian Empire, with Sennacherib, the Emperor Sennacherib, they were at the gates. Literally, the barbarians were at the gates. The Assyrians were vicious. They were at the gates of Jerusalem. A plague sent by God Almighty wiped out a good chunk of their army, but they were also able to go to a city called Lachish in Israel, conquer Lachish, sack it, destroy it. So the Assyrians caused a lot of damage. This administrative center dates from that period, and who knows, possibly not far from the center, were those Assyrian hordes who were attempting to lay siege to Jerusalem, but unsuccessfully. So that's one great new discovery from 2,700 years ago. The other one, David, real quick, that really piques my interest is the Persian period, the period of Persian rule over Israel. Now, this is when King Cyrus, as we know from the Bible, God used Cyrus. He sent the exiles, the Babylonian exiles, the Jewish people who were taken against their will into slavery to Babylon after the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. 70 years later, King Cyrus of Persia sends them back. He says, hey, sends a decree, go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, rebuild Jerusalem. Well, this is talked about in the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, but up until now, we hadn't had a whole lot of archaeological evidence from that period for whatever reason, until a month ago, where at the city of David, one of my favorite places in Jerusalem, ancient Jerusalem, the city of David, they uncovered, archaeologists there for the Israel Antiquities Authority, David, who you've worked with, they uncovered some ancient seals from that period with the names of various administrators in Jerusalem at that time from some 2,600 years ago. So now all of a sudden, hey, here it is, proof also for the Persian period that are talked about again in Ezra and Nehemiah. David, I say all that to say the Bible is coming to life in Israel every day. I believe that God is using archaeology right now to reveal himself. Hey, some folks have to be convinced intellectually, and God is using these amazing archaeological finds to prove the truth of the Bible to many right now.
That is so fascinating. You know, the administrative center, you mentioned Sennacherib, right? Well, within Sennacherib's name, we actually find the pagan god Sin's name, all right? I was in a dig a number of years ago along with about 40 other people, and we actually pulled out a little seal pressed into wax or clay. It makes the impression of the moon god Sin which actually dates back to really the time of Ur the Chaldees, where Abraham came out of, right?
Yeah.
But we found it in Jerusalem, just north of the city walls. So this means that this pagan worship had been taken to Jerusalem. The seal itself dated to the time of King Solomon. Well, we know King Solomon got involved, sadly, with the worship of other gods. He was led astray. But this just shows the importance. You've got Sennacherib, the worship of this god Sin in Jerusalem, and it's just the importance. We've got to stick to the facts. We've got the biblical record right here. We need to remember it. We need to trust in the God of the Bible, Yahweh, who gives us all the answers, doesn't He?
Yeah, He does, David. I'm glad you mentioned I'm usually not glad of any mention of paganism, but it's good that you mentioned these pagan figurines, because I neglected to mention at that administrative center that was uncovered next to the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem from the time of Hezekiah, there were found some of these pagan figurines. David, as you said, in Jerusalem of all places, God's city, His one and only holy city, the city where He has written His name forever, there was the worship of pagan gods going on in Jerusalem. So, hey, when you think about the Assyrian invasion, God's judgment, the Babylonian invasion, pagan worship was rampant in Israel and in Jerusalem at that time. Hey, the Assyrians at the end of the day, David, carted away 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel to parts unknown. So there are consequences when we turn against God, especially, look, God's chosen people, His land, to whom much is given, much is required. Mm-hmm. And you could say during that period in the history of Jerusalem, many were dropping the ball and turning to Baal worship, pagan worship, even human sacrifice, even child sacrifice during that period in Jerusalem. And that's something God won't stand for, in particular in His city.
That's an important reminder, Eric. Listen, can you talk about any of the archaeology that dates back to the time period of Genesis and Moses that you've been involved with in the past? I know you've done a lot of on-location filming as well.
Yeah, in terms of on-location filming, David, from the Genesis period, two places really stick out to my mind. Just a few months ago, before the whole COVID lockdown, I was able to visit Joshua's altar deep in Samaria, in the mountains of Israel. We actually needed an escort from the Israel Defense Forces that would take us through winding roads and rubble and stones off the beaten path, quite literally, to Joshua's altar. I found this fascinating, David. It's not a place that many people have visited, but we were able to film there. And first of all, it's a large structure, and it's largely intact, unhewn stones. The Bible talks many times about at these various sites that the Israelites were to use. God instructs them to use unhewn stones. That's exactly what we have at this site in Samaria. I believe it was certainly Joshua's altar. I think if you see it up close, David, and we did an entire episode of the Watchmen TV show on TBN from this Joshua's altar site. This is no doubt an altar. It's large and it fits all the specifications that are laid out in the Bible. Now, when the Jewish people, when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River into the land, Joshua led them, of course. Moses didn't make the trip, unfortunately, but Joshua led them. They built this altar. The Bible is very clear that they built this altar in the book of Joshua. It talks about it. It's right there. The geography matches up, the specifications match up, and this is most certainly an altar. So that was fascinating to be there and film at Joshua's altar. And David, you know this very well. You just pinch yourself every time you're at these sites. It never gets old. Number two, another site that I find fascinating. It's a very controversial site, Hebron. The tomb of the matriarchs and the patriarchs located in this city. So much history there. This is a city where Abraham spent a good deal of time. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried there, as well as their wives. So that is a fascinating spot. And I also love, David, just one more mention from that Genesis period, Beersheba, also known as Beersheba in Israel. That's in southern Israel in the Negev desert. This is literally where Abraham pitched his tents in Beersheba. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all there. Abraham's well is there. All of these great biblical stories from Genesis. David, it's all there. That's why it's so important what you're talking about at David Rives Ministries on creation in the 21st century. you're sharing the truth, David. It's not just your personal opinion. It's the truth of the Word of God, number one. But number two, it's all there. The Bible is truly coming to life. Everything that's talked about in the Bible, from Abraham's well, Joshua's altar, Hebron, Shiloh, all of these amazing places we hear about in Genesis, they are still standing today. Maybe not in the grandeur of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, but the ruins are there. In many cases, they are pretty well preserved, and you can get an idea of what life was like during the time of Genesis. It's truth. It's all there today, and anyone who goes to Israel can see it with their own two eyes. It's a privilege and a blessing to see it come to life.
Well, not only can they see it, there's nothing like being there and seeing it for yourself, but on your YouTube channel, on your television program on Trinity Broadcasting Network, you actually take people on location to some of these sites, correct?
Yeah, I do. And David, it's such a thrill. I mean, we're going around to these different sites, and I'm in Israel every few months, and I'll be back as soon as the flights are going back to Israel after this whole pandemic passes. I'll be on the next one back to the Holy Land. And it's a thrill to go to these sites. Again, you just shake your head. And I think about what David said in Psalms, who am I and what is my family? How the heck am I, a guy from Philly, from Northeast Philly, from a working class background? God has a sense of humor to kind of pluck me out and then plant me in his land. But there I am, and I'm able to share this with others. I'm with some of the great tour guides and archaeologists that you probably know very well, David. And we're traveling around the land from north to south to east to west. Not only that, we're going to Jordan. We were in Iraq just a few months ago. We were in Kurdistan. Talk about a biblical history, David. Think of Jonah, think of Nineveh. We were in that region in northern Iraq. Now it's Kurdistan. Fascinating. Daniel also spent time in that region. So we're going all throughout the Middle East, and we're bringing the Bible to life for people today. And we hope it is building their faith. For people, it's one thing to hear the gospel and you believe it in your heart, but to see it also come to life, it just adds even more to the case for Christ and the case for the Bible.
It sure does. I mean, even seeing, I remember I was at Caesarea Maritimia on the coast of the Mediterranean looking at, and it's the actual one has been taken because they don't want it outside anymore, but looking at this replica of the Pontius Pilate stone. Another good friend who's an archaeologist friend of mine discovered the Pontius Pilate. The first instance, the first reference to Pontius Pilate, showing us that not only the things we read about in our Old Testament are true and accurate, but also the things we read about in the New Testament, including the gospel message.
Yes. You're walking where Jesus walked, David. It's one of my Galilee, the Galilee region, one of my favorite places in the entire world. Capernaum, Bethsaida, it's all there. And you can picture those ancient fishing villages all around the Sea of Galilee. It's a thrill. By the way, hey, next year in Jerusalem, my friend, you and I are going to get on the ground. Maybe we can do some filming in Israel. That would be a thrill.
That would be great. Let's do a tour together or something.
Sounds great.
All right. How can people get in touch with you?
Hey, go to watchmantv.com. That's our YouTube channel, David. You can catch clips. We do a Watchman newscast every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, we're showing clips, posting clips from the Watchman TV show constantly on the YouTube channel. So check it out. That's watchmantv.com. And you can watch the Watchman TV show every Thursday night, 9:00 p.m. Eastern Time here in the States on TBN.
Excellent. Be sure to follow the links, go subscribe to Erick's YouTube channel, and all of his social media for more every week. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining us on the Genesis Science Report. We'll see you next time. I'm David Rives. I want to remind you to keep looking up because truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.